Baked Alaska said something pretty intense yesterday. I want all your thoughts on this. He said he believes that the number of the Holocaust deaths is not right. Therefore, the Holocaust is invalid. Oof.
Invalid? I
don't even remember him saying that.
I don't know what invalid means from that.
Like, almost in the terms of like, since it's not the actual number,
then all the facts are like completely skewed, and it's not.
Or in question. I guess.
I'd have to agree with them on that. I mean, because if you look at it like this, let's say the Holocaust revisionists are correct in that these were just work camps and the majority of people died from typhus and starvation, which, I mean, does make sense from these different documentaries that I've seen. Then it's no worse than what we did with the Japanese in our internment camps, right? Then they can't use this as this whole, big guilt trip and
but
the Holocaust.
Or you could argue, I'm pretty sure it was worse than what the Japanese went through.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying that it's
but the mere fact that they captured Jewish people and many of them were killed, and even if they weren't killed, died from diseases, that doesn't make it invalid. It's still a disgusting thing that happened.
Well, one thing to consider, and this sort of depends on the morality. What do you think of the morality of conscription? Because would you rather have been sent to one of these camps where you have a 20% chance of survival, or would you have rather been sent to Russia where you have like a 2% chance of survival? That would be.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, they even had like
another thing to take into consideration is how much of the people in concentration camps were political opponents and were effectively what we would call today terrorists against the German government. We tend to treat terrorists by sending them and saying, oh, you are a prisoner of war and you have no right. We do that all the time. To what extent were the people in concentration camp political opponent of that kind, which today we still deprive of rights?
Yeah. One thing I would say, I guess critiques talk about disunion among the alt-right. This may be where there's actually like real disunion in like views of Hitler. I am not a fan of the Hitler regime at all. So.
Go ahead.
Just I guess like, because like I've been reading more and more about like the Holocaust and basically what the world was like during that time, and it's the fact that here's just my question is like, if the scale of it was so large, like the accepted number is like 6 million Jews, right? If that is so large, how is it that like no one noticed? I don't know. Like I've been skeptical of literally.
Didn't you know they were being turned into? Didn't you know they were being sent down roller coasters into ovens and turned into lampshades and then turned into soap? I can't believe that no one noticed this. These are stories. The Jews were being turned into lampshades and soap bars and sent down roller coasters into ovens, right?
Okay, I haven't heard.
I don't know if we want to get Warski's channel banned here.
No, that's why I'm not gonna be putting a comment on.
All right, I'll stop talking about it.
I mean, you could talk about it. I can't talk about it. JF, I don't know if Quebec.
I don't even know who brought this subject. Someone brought the subject up. I don't know.
Commenter. Super chat.
Got it.
Right. I mean, I feel like I have to almost be skeptical of everything now. Like that has been considered fact, especially the things that you learn in school, like in the public education system. It's just like, they give you like such a biased account of everything, but you don't realize that until years later. And if you don't do research of your own, you're just going to continue believing what they taught you. So I don't know, like, I guess I just like constantly, there's like a tinfoil hat just like attached to my head from now on. I don't know.
That's a good way of thinking.
I think what you're pointing to here is very LT behavior. We have to be skeptics of everything. And Andy, as far as you asked for the hate speech laws of Quebec, there's an interesting chapter on the hate speech laws that says, if the hate speech has been pointed to for the purpose of removal, it is not hate speech. And so I will point to the last 10 minutes of conversation and say we should remove that part of the stream, Handy.
No, fair enough. I think someone sent me a message about having someone on that apparently the hate speech laws aren't what we are actually saying, and that we can't be arrested for certain hate speech, and there is freedom of speech.
Hate speech in Canada is less severe than we tend to think. It's true that if you are making a true statement, according to the statute, you should not be judged for hate speech. If you make a statement that you point for removal, you should not be pursued for hate speech. And also, if you make a statement about a group, but that you made the statement for the purpose of engaging into discussion about the political situation, you can do it. So, for example, if I say, well, blacks have lower IQ, first, it is true, so that the first statutes apply. I cannot be sued for hate speech. But also, if I was to engage in that discourse in good faith and for the purpose of political discussion, I would also not be committing hate speech. So there are defenses.
So meaning if we're just discussing it, yeah, so basically everything that we've done on this channel is fine because it's in terms of discussion, not to bring someone down.
Absolutely. We are talking about the media representation of the Holocaust, and we are talking of it as a public matter that needs to be addressed.
So it ain't full cock yet.
Now, yeah, and there's also an amazing statute in that law which says if you are if you are talking in bad terms of a certain group, but you are doing so based on a religious belief that you take from your own religion, that's fine. So if you happen to trust the Talmud or the or whatever the Islamic books or the Catholic books, you are okay because it's a racist statement that comes from your own religion.
I don't.
Well, let's start a religion. Let's start a religion.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I feel like that is super. If you're like a Christian person and you say some, racist shit, I'm pretty sure they're going to be coming after you, like in contrast to a person who reads the Quran or something like that. I feel like that there's some selective process here. It can't.
They'll say it's not your religion. They'll say you misinterpreted, and like this judge knows the correct way to. This Jewish judge knows the correct way to interpret the Bible.
I could see that just going so horribly wrong. So
Did you see how
someone points out that my representation is not complete, and that's true. There is also human rights tribunal that were introduced a decade or two ago, and these are kind of a civil and non-completely criminal way to harass people who make statements. So yes, that's a big problem, but I was talking about the criminal law.
Did you see? Okay, so recently, Trudeau, he was doing a Q&A, and some girl was talking, and she said "mankind" at some point. You see this, and then he interrupted her to say, "Excuse me, it's people kind."
People kind.
Yeah. So now, recently, a bunch of news outlets in Canada have released articles saying if you laughed at him saying "people kind," that you are a racist. I'm just he's or not racist. You're sexist. Yeah, sorry. And I'm like, go fuck yourselves. By the way, Gabriel Lopez asked for a request from JF, $10. Hey JF, can you say the Jews with the echo?
The Jews.
Oh man, that's funny. Yeah, I think it's good that you think like that, though, Reva. I think that everyone should be thinking like that. Like, what do you think that people were being taught in schools during the Vietnam War? I mean, all the other people that questioned the Vietnam War and how we got into it, or any of these wars, they were called conspiracy theorists. Now, a lot of these things are coming down and becoming declassified. I'm a true believer in the theory of the victor writes the history, and you can look at who controls our education system. I always talk about this. The federal government, 1978, Jimmy Carter, the Department of Education. They have huge contracts with places, publishers like McGraw-Hill. You can look at who's at the top of McGraw-Hill, who publishes most of the school books. Larry Berg, Peter Cohen. This is the McGraw-Hill even destroyed a history book. I think I mentioned this yesterday. They destroyed a history book because of people had backlash towards McGraw-Hill publishing this book that showed maps of Israel gaining territory from Palestine. So they had to just completely destroy this history book. So we have to question everything. And I think that more and more people within them, especially Generation Z, are doing that. Like I said, with the more access to the internet and things like that.
Yeah, there's a great article on Cracked, which is a horrible website, but has this one good article on a guy who wrote a textbook, and I think it's great. It's not like a scientific survey or anything, but I think it's sort of a little bit insightful into what actually goes on to writing a textbook, because this guy didn't even have a degree in the relevant field, but they chose him because he was good at writing. He wrote well and told him to research, like it gave him sort of like a syllabus, and then he was supposed to research in like a year like this like some fourth grade science textbook. So he was like going on Wikipedia and stuff, and that's where the textbook came from. But of course the name on the textbook is not necessarily the person who actually wrote it. It's very common to like to ask some guy with like credentials to put their name on the textbook, and then have some other guy to actually write it. So that's like true. These textbooks are not what you think they are. So
right. Well, I was just talking about the publisher in general, just McGraw-Hill, the publisher. But yeah, I mean, we should be questioning these things. I mean, look at how many things have been declassified that people were called crackpots for thinking, 30, 40 years ago.
Spying on Trump? Yeah.
Bro, talking about more like the Gulf of Tonkin and things like that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it actually brings up like a good question as far as like the people who are making these textbooks, and the people who are basically in charge of writing history. Like, there are people who are aware of what actually happened, but choose to ignore it. But then it's like I shared one of Styx's videos on Facebook once, like this was a couple years ago, and it was can't remember exactly what it was about, but essentially, Styx, like, he analyzes things pretty in depth. And so I posted it on Facebook, and my old what was she, world history teacher and like European history teacher, she was like, you shouldn't believe that, like, this is alternative media, why are you listening to this guy who looks like he's from the Rust Belt? I'm like, wait,
he's from Vermont.
The Rust Belt. Oh yeah, shit.
I know.
He's from Vermont.
I know, he's from Vermont. I'm like, wait, one, what's wrong with being from the Rust Belt? Two, he's from Vermont. Three, like, but didn't you always teach me to be like skeptical of stuff? And it's like, she's like, well, it's not right what he's saying. So it's like, do you think she actually, is everybody in on this conspiracy, or are there people who are like, aware, but they choose to, or just not aware or whatever?
I mean, I think as far as like in on what conspiracy, like the education is overwhelmingly controlled by leftist, cultural Marxists, and postmodernists. No, I mean that's a fact. I mean that's definitely not a conspiracy theory.
Sure.
No, but like how she's asking, sort of, how does it happen? Is it a grand conspiracy with men in smoke-filled rooms, or is it just sort of a more emergent thing?
Right.
But like, I don't know. Like, were you ever like a shit lib? Were you ever like a big Democrat sort of thing?
Oh, yeah, actually. So like 3 years ago.
Was that a conspiracy? Were you like conspiring in that, or were you just a true believer? Right.
I mean, I was just a believer like anybody else. Just like, you're just ignorant, so you kind of just believe the things people tell you, unless you really search for it. So yeah,
that's it.
Right, but the ideology comes from certain people, though.
I think it's a really complicated question. Really complicated.
Well, it just depends on what we could talk about here.